I didn't notice him the first time. That's the part I keep replaying when I'm awake and when I'm not. The habits of a normal night shift are so familiar, you stop seeing the edges of things. You assume the halls are safe because they've always been safe. You assume the guy in scrubs belongs there because you've seen 1,000 people in scrubs. I work nights at a private assisted living facility that sits behind a medical plaza. It's not a big place, but it's expensive. The residents have families with money and guilt and good lawyers. We have a nurse on duty, 2 aides, and security that's more of a warm body than anything else. Cameras in the common areas, locks on the doors, spotless brochures that promise dignity and comfort. Most nights are quiet. You pass meds, you make sure people don't wander, you help someone to the bathroom, you wipe down counters while the building hums around you like a sleeping animal. I was an aide then. I'm still an aide, technically, though I've been off the rota for weeks. I don't know if I'm going back. That first night was a Tuesday, but it could have been any night. I remember because we were short-staffed, and because the weather had turned cold enough to make the lobby feel like a cave. The automatic doors kept coughing in people who didn't belong there. Delivery drivers, family members who forgot visiting hours, a man who wandered in looking for the urgent care across the street. Close to midnight, I went down to the laundry room for fresh linens. There's a service corridor that connects the facility to the plaza's back-of-house areas. It's locked, but staff badge access opens it. Sometimes maintenance will prop it with a wedge during deliveries and forget to remove it. That night, it was ajar. I remember pausing, holding the basket of sheets against my hip, considering whether to be annoyed or grateful. The corridor saved me a long loop around the building. I stepped through. The corridor smelled like bleach and old cardboard. Overhead lights buzzed softly. It's a dumb place to be alone, but I've walked it 100 times. Halfway down, I saw someone ahead of me. He was tall and broad-shouldered, walking away, pushing a wheeled cart. The cart had a plastic bin on top and a folded blue sheet hanging over the side. The man wore a pale uniform that could have been a nurse's set or a doctor's coat layered over scrubs. The outfit was so clean it looked staged. On his head was a pig mask, not a Halloween pink cartoon mask. This one was a dull grayish flesh color with an exaggerated snout and glassy black eyes. The mouth curled into a fixed expression that was not a smile and not a frown. Just the stupid neutrality of an animal that doesn't understand the room it's in. My brain stumbled over it. If I'd seen him in the lobby, I might have assumed it was some sick joke for a charity event. But in that corridor, at midnight, pushing a cart like he belonged there, it landed differently. I said, "Hey." He didn't turn. I said it louder, the tone I use when residents try to ignore me. "Sir, you can't be back here. This area is staff only." He kept walking. I stopped because I'm not fearless and I'm not stupid, and because the mask made everything feel like a trap. He reached an intersection where the corridor split. Without looking back, he turned left and disappeared. I stood there long enough for the silence to feel bad in my mouth. Then I rushed forward. The left corridor led to a maintenance bay and an exterior door that opened into the plaza's loading area. The door was closed. The bay was empty. No cart, no pig mask, no tall man. I checked the door handle. Locked. My heart was kicking like it wanted a different body. I told myself I must have seen a maintenance worker wearing some protective face gear, Maybe it was a respirator cover I read as a pig mask. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was some dumb reality show thing. I rehearsed these explanations until they sounded almost believable. Back upstairs, I mentioned it to Marla, the charge nurse that night. She'd been in healthcare longer than I've been alive, and she has the kind of calm that comes from having seen all kinds of mess. "Someone in a pig mask?" she repeated. "Yeah, in the service corridor, with a cart." Marla didn't laugh. She didn't look worried either. Just tired. If someone's in costume in the building, security needs to know. I checked. He was gone. Then we log it. She reached for the incident binder. "Describe him." I tried. Tall, male, broad, clean white coat, maybe pale green scrubs under it. Pig mask with black eyes. He moved like he knew where he was going. Marla wrote it down without comment. "I'll ping Gus to check the cameras." Gus was security, an older guy who spent most of his shift reading sports highlights on his phone. The next morning, Marla told me the cameras showed nothing. Nothing. Service corridor cams were down for maintenance. She said it like that solved the question. The lobby footage didn't show anyone in a mask coming in or out. Maybe through the loading area. Maybe. But you did the right thing telling me. She said it with her nurse voice, the one that closes conversations. I accepted it because I wanted to. That should have been the only strange thing that week. But the difference between a weird story and a scary one is what happens next. 2 nights later, the first resident died. His name was Mr. Dieter. He was 87 and stubborn as a nail. He rang his call bell for a glass of water like it was a political statement. He was also one of the few residents whose mind was still sharp, which meant he remembered every small insult the world had given him. Around 3 a.m. No, I'm not giving you the time like that. Just late. Quiet. The hour when the building feels like it's holding its breath. He called out for help. I hurried into his room with a cup. He was sitting up, pale and sweating, his hands clutching at his chest. Marla came right behind me. We did what we're trained to do. We checked vitals. We called emergency services. We stayed calm while his breathing got thinner and his eyes got unfocused. When the paramedics arrived, he was already gone. It was sad, but not shocking. He had a heart condition. Families expect this kind of thing, even when they say they don't. But after the body was taken, Marla found something on the floor behind the bedside chair. A latex glove. We have gloves everywhere. That alone doesn't mean anything. But this glove was new and clean and had a smear of something dark near the wrist. Not blood. Something thicker, almost like paint. Marla picked it up with a tissue, frowning. "What is that?" I asked. "Probably nothing." She threw it into a biohazard bag anyway. A day later, the facility's doctor signed off on natural causes. The family took it without argument. A week passed. Then Mrs. Rabe died. She was a tiny woman with a voice like a whistle and a habit of hiding cookies in her nightstand. She had dementia but still recognized me most days. Sometimes she swore I was her nephew. I let her. I found her on a night I was covering 2 halls alone. The call bell system showed her room was activated. When I entered, She was on the floor by the bed, her nightgown twisted, her mouth open in a silent shape. The first thing I noticed was the smell, not decay. It hadn't been long enough. This was chemical, sweet and sharp. There was a small plastic vial on her bedside table. No label. I called Marla. We called emergency services. The paramedics worked longer this time, the way they do when they sense witnesses watching, but they eventually stopped. Marla pocketed the vial. "Where did that come from?" I asked. "It didn't come from us." Her face was tight. "Don't say anything about it to anyone else." That sentence rearranged the room for me. We reported it to the facility administrator. The vial disappeared into an internal review. The official story remained, "Likely fall with complication." The families and the staff were already tired from the normal stress of elder care, so fear slipped in quietly, like water under a door. Then came the third death, the one that should have made us lock everything down. A new resident, early 70s, post-stroke, needed help with almost everything. He wasn't supposed to leave his room without assistance. And yet, on a night when the building was quiet, someone wheeled him into the service corridor. We found the empty wheelchair first. It was parked near the laundry room like someone had lost it. I recognized the chair because it was bright blue and new. I remember the cold drop in my stomach when I saw it. His room was empty. Marla and I fanned out. Gus, the security guard, walked slowly behind us, flashlight in hand like a bored tourist. The service corridor door was closed now, but the wedge was back in place. When I pushed the door open, the lights inside were on. The corridor looked normal, except for the cart. The same kind of cart I'd seen the first night. A blue medical sheet was draped over something long and uneven. Marla said my name like a warning. I walked anyway. The sheet was weighted at the ends, as if someone had taken care to lay it neatly. I lifted one corner. I'm not going to describe every detail of what was under it. I don't need to. You can fill in what a man looks like when life has been left behind in a hurry. What I will tell you is that his face had a look of panic frozen in place. His mouth was open, and his eyes were wide, and there were faint bruises around his nose and lips like he'd fought for air. Marla whispered, "Call 911. Gus stood frozen, his flashlight shaking. This time there was no quiet sign-off, no internal memo. The police came. The coroner came. The facility administrator came down in his suit like he was attending a business lunch. The service corridor cameras were suddenly fixed. Questions started. A detective asked me to tell the story again. He was polite in a way that felt rehearsed. I told him about the pig mask. He wrote it down without reacting. Could it have been a costume? A prank? I don't think so, I said. What makes you say that? Because he moved like he was working. The detective nodded like that meant nothing. We were told to be vigilant. We were told to keep doors locked. We were told to report unusual behavior. No one mentioned how easy it was to move through a place like ours if you looked like staff. Families were told there had been an incident. Word spread anyway. 2 employees quit within a few days. I considered it. But rent and loyalty and denial are a strong rope, and I kept thinking maybe the killer had gotten what he wanted and would disappear. I was wrong. The next time I saw him, he was inside the building where residents actually lived. It was a weekend shift, quieter than usual, fewer family visits. Some staff had called out. The administrator was off-site. I was restocking supplies in a small utility alcove near the memory care wing. The alcove is just big enough for shelves and the faint smell of alcohol wipes. I was counting in my head, trying to make sure we had enough briefs and gloves. When I shifted a box, a shadow fell across the doorway. I looked up. He stood there like a statue. The pig mask was the same. Gray flesh, black eyes, a snout that caught the overhead light. He wore a pale medical outfit, and around his neck was a stethoscope that looked almost too clean to be real. He held a clipboard. Not because he needed it, because it completed the picture. My throat closed. He tilted his head. I asked, "Who are you?" The words came out small. He stepped into the alcove and shut the door behind him. The click of the latch was quiet and final. I backed up until my shoulders pressed the shelves. I tried to think of all the loud things I could do. Kick something, throw something, scream. But there's a kind of shock that makes you silent because your brain is trying to bargain with wrongness. He raised one gloved hand. In it was a syringe. The barrel was clear with a fluid that looked colorless. The needle gleamed. I'm not proud of what happened next. I pushed past him. I'm smaller than him by a lot, but desperation makes you fast. I slammed my shoulder into him. He stumbled back into the shelves. The clipboard clattered to the floor. I got the door open and ran. I ran down the hall, yelling for Marla, yelling for anyone. Behind me, I heard nothing. No chase. No footsteps. That was worse. I reached the nurse's station. 2 aides looked up, startled. "There's a man," I began. Then I stopped because the sentence sounded insane. "A man in a pig mask," I finished anyway. They looked at each other. Marla was on meds rounds and came running when she heard the commotion. I dragged her to the alcove. The door was open. The shelves were neat. No clipboard. No syringe. No pig mask. We checked the cameras. He never appeared. That was the moment I realized I was not dealing with a random intruder. He knew where the blind spots were. He knew the rhythms of a facility like ours. He knew how to wear authority as a disguise. The detective returned that evening. I told him what happened. "You're sure it was the same person you saw in the corridor?" "Yes." "Could it be a staff member playing a joke?" "A joke?" I said too sharply. "We have 3 dead residents." He didn't argue. He just watched my face as if my fear was a clue. I asked him if they had suspects. He said they were looking into multiple angles. The phrase sounded like nothing. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the building had shifted into a different reality, one where any closed door could contain him. I started checking ID badges more than I ever had. I asked questions I'd never asked before. "Which unit are you covering? Who do you report to? Can you show me your badge?" Some people were annoyed. Some people understood. The worst part was that all he had to do was look irritated and professional. and someone would assume I was the problem. 2 nights after the alcove incident, a new agency nurse arrived for a temp shift. His name was Evan. He was mid-30s, tired eyes, the kind of person who can hold a calm face while chaos happens behind it. He introduced himself to me in the break room while making coffee. "I'm just here for the weekend," he said. "Lucky you," I replied. He gave me a half smile, waiting. I told him the basics without going into the pig mask. I didn't want to scare another person into quitting. I just wanted him to be cautious. "People die in places like this," he said gently. "Sometimes it looks worse than it is." "I know," I said. "But still." He nodded. Later, around the time most of the building was asleep, I saw Evan walking down the hall toward the service corridor. He was pushing a supply cart. A blue sheet was folded on top. For a second, my brain went white. Then I realized the cart was ours. Evan was wearing the agency badge. No pig mask. Normal face. Normal exhaustion. "I'm going to grab extra wound care supplies," he said. "You don't need to go through the corridor alone," I blurted. He paused. "What corridor?" I swallowed. I didn't want to sound hysterical, but I also didn't want to find another body covered in a sheet. "The service corridor," I said. "It freaks me out." Evan studied me for a beat longer than polite. "Okay," he said. "Come with me." So I did. We walked together, 2 staff members doing a normal task. That's how safety works. People in pairs, routine armor. The corridor door was locked. Evan swiped his temporary badge. The lock beeped red. "Doesn't work for this door," he said. "Makes sense." He set the cart aside. We turned to go back. From the other end of the corridor door, inside the corridor, on the far side of the glass inset, someone moved. A pale shape. A face pressed close. Pig snout. Black eyes. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might pass out standing up. Evan sucked in a sharp breath. The masked man raised a finger to the glass. Not a warning. A slow, deliberate gesture like a teacher making a point. Then he stepped back into the corridor shadows. Evan grabbed my arm. "Is that what you were trying to tell me?" I nodded. "Call security. Call the police." We did both. Gus arrived out of breath, looking more annoyed than afraid. The police arrived 10 minutes later, which felt like an hour. They opened the corridor. They found nothing. But this time the cameras were working. The detective pulled us into a small office to review the footage. The hallway cam facing the corridor door showed Evan and me standing there. It showed our reactions. It didn't show the masked man. I stared at the screen until my eyes stung. Evan said quietly, "That's impossible." The detective tapped the keyboard, rewound, played it again. Different angles, same result. "You both saw him," he said, not a question. "Yes," Evan replied. The detective leaned back. "Either someone's messing with you, or this person knows our blind spots better than we do. Or the cameras are being tampered with," I said. He regarded me with a new kind of interest. That night, the facility finally did what it should have done after the 3rd death. They hired extra security. They limited access points. They installed temporary motion sensors in the service corridor. They told staff to walk in pairs. It all sounded good on paper. But it didn't address the simplest, ugliest truth. A man who looks like a doctor can walk into a place full of vulnerable people and be welcomed. A pig mask turned that truth into something theatrical, but the costume was never the point. The point was permission. The night ended without another incident. I drove home with my hands clenched so tight my knuckles hurt. I told myself I was safe outside the facility. I told myself he was fixated on the building, on the kind of control a place like that gives him. I told myself he wouldn't care about me. I told myself this even though he had shut the alcove door behind him. Even though he had chosen me as a target. When I got to my apartment, I checked my locks twice. I live in a small place with thin walls. My neighbor blasts music through weekends. The streetlight outside my window flickers like it's tired of its own job. I showered longer than usual, trying to scrub the feeling of that mask off my skin. When I stepped out, my phone was buzzing on the counter. A text from an unknown number. No name, just a photo. It was taken inside the facility. I recognized the utility alcove. I recognized the shelves. On the floor, right where the clipboard had fallen, someone had placed a single latex glove, and written on it with dark ink was my name. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. I checked the sender details. No caller ID. No linked contact. I tried to call back. The number was disconnected. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and realized that everything we called secure was just a story we told ourselves. He had my name. He had my number. He had enough access to send a message from inside the building without being seen. I didn't sleep. The next day I went back to work anyway. This is where people assume you'll say something brave, that you'll announce you're quitting, or you'll go to the media, or you'll become a hero. I didn't. I went back because I couldn't afford not to. I went back because fear doesn't always push you away from a place. It pins you to it. I went back because I thought if I stayed close, I could see him coming. The administrator called a staff meeting in the late afternoon. We stood in a circle in the dining room, the tables cleared, the chandelier too bright. He told us the police were involved. He told us not to speak to families without approval. He told us the new security measures were state-of-the-art. He told us to take care of ourselves. He did not say the word serial. He did not say murderer. He did not say that a man in a pig mask had targeted a healthcare facility, the way a hunter returns to a familiar field. After the meeting, I found Evan at the coffee station. "You saw him?" I said. "Yeah." "And the cameras didn't." He rubbed his eyes. "I don't know what to make of that." "Neither do I." We stood in silence for a moment. Then he said, "If he's taking pictures of your name, he's getting close to staff files. That's not random." "I know." "Do you have anyone you can stay with?" I shook my head. He hesitated. "If you want, I can walk you to your car after shift. Maybe we can coordinate breaks. 2 sets of eyes." I wanted to say I didn't need help, but I did. We worked the next night like that, quietly paired when we could, checking doors, checking badges, checking each other's faces for the first crack of panic. Around midnight, the motion sensors in the service corridor triggered. Security converged. The police were notified. The corridor was searched. They found only a cart. On top of it was a sealed envelope. My name in neat block letters. The detective opened it in front of me. Inside was a single printed photo. It showed Mr. Dieter's room. Not the room after he died. The room before. The photo was taken from a low angle, the kind you'd get if you were crouched by the chair. In the reflection of the window behind the bed, you could see a hint of white fabric and a partial pig snout. The killer had been there, watching, waiting, and now he was telling me he could prove it. The detective asked me to go through the night in my head again. Everyone did. The latex glove, the vial, the bruises, the cart, the mask. Evan and I agreed on one thing. The killer wanted to be seen. Not constantly, not carelessly. He wanted a witness. Me. That realization didn't make me feel special. It made me feel like bait. Before the detective left, he said, "If you receive any more messages, you contact me immediately." I said I would. After he left, Marla took me aside. "You're shaking," she said softly. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." She was right. "Why would he pick me?" I asked. Marla looked older in that moment. Sometimes they pick the person who noticed them first. I remembered the corridor, my stupid decision to call out, to demand answers. I had wanted to restore order. Instead, I had introduced myself. Near the end of the shift, Evan went to check on a resident in the far end of memory care while I updated charts. I heard the elevator bell chime on our floor. Footsteps. A rolling cart. I looked up from the computer. A man in a white coat walked past the nurse's station. He wore a pig mask. I didn't freeze this time. I stood and shouted, "Stop!" The two aides on the station snapped to attention. The masked man didn't run. He didn't even hurry. He turned his head toward me. Then he pushed the cart into the memory care wing. I chased him. The aides followed. Security was called. Radios crackled. Memory care is a maze of short halls and locked doors designed to confuse wandering residents into staying safe. The masked man seemed to know it perfectly. He turned a corner into the small activity room. We skidded in after him. The room was empty, except for Evan. He was on the floor near the craft table. His badge was still clipped to his chest. His eyes were open. The killer was gone. I knelt beside Evan, my hands hovering because I couldn't accept what I was seeing. I checked for a pulse. Nothing. I pressed my ear near his mouth. No breath. There was a small puncture mark at the side of his neck. A faint chemical smell clung to his skin. The syringe. The vial. The pieces fit together into something cold. I heard one of the aides start to cry. Security arrived seconds later. Then the police. The building erupted into controlled chaos. I sat against the wall while Marla gave a statement through clenched teeth. The detective arrived with a face that told me he already knew what he'd find. He stepped into the activity room. He looked at Evan. Then he looked at me. "He got past the new security measures," I said. The detective didn't answer. On the craft table, someone had placed another envelope. My name. Inside was a single sentence written on a torn strip of paper. "You only feel safe when you're useful." The detective read it aloud, then put it into an evidence bag. I didn't ask what it meant, because I already knew. I was the witness, the chosen audience. And if I left, he would follow. If I stayed, he would keep proving he could reach anyone. The administrators finally shut the facility down for 48 hours. Residents were moved to partner sites. Families were panicked. The press camped outside the plaza. I gave my statement again and again. The pig mask, the clean coat, the cart, the quiet way he walked. The detective asked if I could identify a voice. He never spoke to me. Not once. Not once. He wrote it down. The silence was another weapon. It let him be anything we feared. When the facility reopened, only a skeleton crew returned. I was one of them. I told myself I was there to help residents. But the truth was uglier. I needed to know whether he would come back, whether Evan was a message or a warning, whether I was still the center of this nightmare. The first night back, the building felt hollow, like a house after a funeral. Many rooms were empty. The din of TV shows and late-night snacks was replaced by the soft click of locks. I walked the halls with a radio at my hip, my phone in my pocket, my keys curled tight in my hand. I kept expecting to see a pale coat at the edge of my vision. I kept expecting the pig face to appear around a corner. Nothing happened. Then, just before dawn, a resident I didn't recognize stopped me in the hallway. He was new, transferred in during the closure. Middle-aged, recovering from surgery, temporarily placed here for rehab. He looked confused. "Is the doctor coming back?" he asked. I felt my skin go cold. "What doctor?" "The one who checked my incision." My mouth went dry. "When did that happen?" "Earlier tonight." He frowned. Nice guy. A little odd. Wore a mask. Said he was being cautious. "What kind of mask?" The man hesitated. "Like a pig?" I thought it was a joke. I didn't answer. I walked him back to his room and asked him to sit while I got Marla. When we returned, the room was empty. The man was slumped in the chair by the window. His skin had a gray cast that didn't belong to sleep. Marla checked his pulse, shook her head. I stared at the bedside table. A clean latex glove, a small plastic vial with no label, and a folded blue sheet. The killer had come back. Not for me. For the simple pleasure of showing that he could. I stood there feeling the floor tilt under me. Because now I knew something worse than being chosen. I was not special at all. I was just next. They moved the body out before sunrise. That transfer resident's name was Elias Hartman. I only learned it because his chart was still open on the computer when I returned to the nurse's station. His next of kin was a son in another city. The paperwork said short-term rehab and expected discharge within 2 weeks. 2 weeks that would never happen. The police sealed his room. The administrator called another emergency meeting. The extra security firm sent 2 more guards who wore bulky jackets and looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. By midday, the press was back at the curb. Families called non-stop. The facility's PR consultant wrote a statement that said we were cooperating with law enforcement and that residents' safety was our highest priority. The statement didn't mention the pig mask. It didn't mention that someone had infiltrated a locked care unit, posed as a clinician, and killed a man by touching him like a professional. It didn't mention that we had become a hunting ground. I drove home after the shift and sat in my car for a long time before I went up the stairs. I didn't want to be in the apartment. I didn't want to be in my own head either. I called my sister. We're not close in the way people assume sisters should be. We're close like 2 people who grew up in the same storm and ended up with different kinds of house damage. She answered on the 3rd ring. I can't talk long, she said. I need you to listen, I replied. That got her attention. I told her about the deaths, the pig mask, the photos, Evan. She was quiet for a long time. You need to leave that job, she said. I can't just... You can. You're choosing not to. I didn't argue because she was right, and because truth is hard to hold when you're exhausted. What if he follows me? I asked. Then you go to the police and you stay with someone. You don't keep walking into the place where he's already proven he can reach you. I almost said I had no one. Then I realized I did. I could come to you for a few days, I said. You can come tonight. I hung up and started packing. I grabbed enough clothes for a week, my toiletries, and the folder of documents I always keep near the door. When you grow up watching your parents lose control of a household, you keep an emergency file even when you're an adult. I was zipping the bag when my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time it wasn't a photo. It was a short video. I tapped it before I could think myself out of it. The angle was low and shaky. The image showed a hallway I recognized instantly. Memory care, looking toward the activity room where Evan had died. The camera moved slowly forward. The lights were dim. The building's nighttime hush poured through the speakers. Then the camera turned left into the activity room. The clip ended. No sound besides the soft hum of the building. No words, but the message was the same. I can be anywhere. I set my phone down and felt my hands start to tremble. I tried to breathe the way Marla had taught me to breathe when I was new. Slow, steady, something you can pretend is control. I called the detective. He answered like he'd been waiting for my number. Send it to me, he said. I did. Are you safe right now? I'm at home. That's not an answer. I hesitated. I think so. Can you go somewhere with other people? My sisters. Go. And don't drive there alone if you can avoid it. If you have a neighbor you trust, ask them to walk you to your car. I didn't have that kind of neighbor relationship. So I did the next best thing. I left in daylight with my bag and my keys between my fingers like a cheap weapon. I watched every car that slowed near me. I scanned every reflection. I hated that he had turned me into a version of myself I didn't like. I stayed at my sister's for 3 nights. The first night I slept 4 hours in a row and woke up sweating with my jaw clenched so hard it hurt. The second night I dreamed of the corridor, but the lights were off and I was walking by touch. The third night I woke to a phone call from Marla. Her voice was tight and low. "He left something for you again." "What?" "Another envelope. In the staff locker room." My stomach sank. "Did the police take it?" "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first. Don't touch it. Call them." "We already did." I sat up and pressed my palm to my forehead. "Marla," I said, "I'm not there." "I know." The pause that followed felt heavy. "Then how did he know where to leave it?" I asked. "Because you're part of the building even when you're not in it," she said quietly. I understood what she meant. He wasn't tracking me by sight. He was tracking me by system. My schedule, my locker, my identification. The frameworks that make a workplace feel predictable. He was inside our routines. The detective called a few minutes later. "We recovered the envelope," he said. "What was in it?" "An employee access card." My mouth went dry. "Mine?" "Not yours, but it was addressed to you. The card belongs to someone who quit last week." "What does that mean?" "It means he's collecting access." I sat very still. He continued. "We think he may have been employed in some capacity at the medical plaza or a linked vendor, maintenance, cleaning, maybe even agency clinical work. The way he moves suggests familiarity. So you still don't know who he is?" "We have names. We're narrowing it." I almost laughed. Narrowing it while people died. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "For now, stay away from the facility." "My job. We'll speak to the administrator. Consider it protective leave." I didn't believe him. Not because he was lying, but because he couldn't control the facility's budget or pride. Later that day, the administrator called. He sounded like a man rehearsing sincerity. "We're very concerned for your well-being," he said. I waited. "We would like you to take some time off." "Paid?" I almost asked. He didn't offer. "I'll need something in writing," I said. There was a pause. "Of course." I hung up and felt a dull anger settle into my ribs. Money, liability, appearances. What they didn't say was that I had become a risk to the facility. Not because I was unsafe, because my presence attracted the killer. 2 days later, the news broke publicly. The words "serial killer" finally appeared in print. They blurred the facility name for legal reasons at first, but everyone locally knew where it was. Local commentary sections filled with outrage and speculation. The plaza's urgent care issued a statement assuring patients that their site was unaffected, as if the killer cared about corporate boundaries. The detective asked me to come in to review a lineup of photos. I agreed. The station smelled like coffee and old carpet. I sat in a small interview room while an officer brought me a tablet. "Just take your time," he said. The first face was a heavy-set man with a maintenance badge from another facility. The second was a lean security contractor. The third was an agency nurse whose name I didn't recognize. I moved through them slowly. I tried to imagine each of them in the pig mask. The problem with the mask is that it steals the human part of the person wearing it. It turns individuality into shape and height, and the way someone fills space. None of the photos landed as him. "I'm sorry," I said. The officer nodded. "We'll keep going." When I left the station, my phone buzzed. Another unknown number. This time, a message. "You looked at wrong faces." I stopped walking. The sidewalk felt too exposed. I stepped into a cafe and sat at a corner table with my back to the wall. My breath came shallow. He knew I was at the station. That fact told me two things at once. He had access to information, and he was watching my reactions like a scientist watching a lab animal. I showed the message to the detective. His jaw tightened. "We'll trace it," he said. "You said that before." He didn't argue. That night, my sister insisted I stay inside. She made tea, put on a harmless TV show, and tried to anchor me to normal life. I could almost pretend it worked. It didn't, because I couldn't stop thinking about the line he'd written for me. "You only feel safe when you're useful." He had seen something in me that I didn't want anyone to see. My reflex to keep functioning even when I was terrified. The way I used work as a shield. He was turning that shield into a target. On the 5th day away from the facility, Marla called again. "Do you have your uniform with you?" "What?" "Your scrubs, your badge." "Not here." "Good." Her voice was tight. "Someone broke into the staff office," she said. "They went through lockers and the scheduling computer." "What did they take?" "We don't know yet. But the police think he was looking for staff records." To be honest, I was almost relieved he was hunting for documents instead of bodies. Almost. The relief didn't last. Because that evening, the detective called and asked me to meet him at the facility. "I thought you told me to stay away," I said. "I did. But we have something you need to see. And I'd rather you see it with us than have it sent to you." I told my sister where I was going. She offered to come with me. I said yes. When we reached the facility, the parking lot was half full of police vehicles and unmarked cars. The building looked ordinary in the early winter dusk. Warm lights, seasonal decor in the lobby. The kind of place that tries to convince you that aging is just another comfortable stage of life. The detective met us near the entrance. He handed me a pair of gloves. "We found something in the service corridor," he said. My mouth went dry. I followed him through the back route with my sister close beside me. I was aware of her breathing, of the way she kept scanning corners like she was trying to absorb the fear from me. The corridor smelled the same as it always had. Bleach, cardboard, a faint metallic note of old pipes. Halfway down, there was a room I'd never been in, a supply storage space used by the medical plaza. It was technically under the same building management. but not part of our facility's official footprint. The door had been forced. Inside, the lights were on. The room was set up like a dressing area. A rolling rack hung with clean coats and scrubs in multiple sizes. A tray of gloves, surgical caps, shoe covers. On a metal table sat a neatly arranged assortment of badges. Not just ours. Badges from 3 different sites in the plaza. A respiratory clinic, a private imaging center, and our assisted living facility. The detective pointed to a corner. There. A laptop, a small printer, a stack of laminated blanks. He wasn't just stealing access. He was manufacturing it. My sister cursed under her breath. I stared at the rack of coats. "This is a wardrobe," I said. "Yes," the detective replied. "Like a stage. That's one way to put it." I could see how he did it now. He didn't need to be a doctor. He needed to look like whatever the moment required. He was not pretending to be a clinician as a secondary tactic. The disguise was the core of the thrill. To be welcomed, to be trusted, to walk up to someone vulnerable and have them relax at the sight of authority. My brain started building a portrait of him that had nothing to do with the pig mask. A man who craved permission so much, he built a whole identity out of stolen uniforms. A man who turned care into a weapon. The detective asked me to look through the coats. I didn't want to. I did anyway. At the back of the rack was the pig mask. It was worse without a body under it. The snout had subtle cracks near the nostrils, as if it had been flexed and cleaned too many times. The inside was lined with dark padding. The straps were adjusted to a head size larger than mine. I didn't touch it. My sister pulled me back gently. "Is this new?" she asked the detective. "Likely his staging area," he said. "We think he's been using back-of-house spaces across the plaza." "Why leave it here?" I asked. The detective was quiet for a moment. "Because he wanted you to see we're behind him. Because he wants control over what you think we're learning." In a different corner were photos pinned to a board. Not crime scene photos. Personal photos printed from social media. Staff members. Marla, Evan, Gus. 2 aides who had quit. Me, my sister, and I at a family wedding 2 summers ago. I felt my knees go weak. "How did he get that?" my sister whispered. "It was public," I said. I'd never thought twice about what I posted. I had assumed anonymity was just another word for not being famous. The detective took photos of the board for evidence and then gently guided us out. "We've put surveillance on this area," he said. "We think he'll come back for the stuff he left." "Why not remove it all?" my sister demanded. "Because he's smart," the detective said, "and because sometimes the only way to catch a careful person is to let them believe their stage is still intact." I didn't like that logic, but I understood it. When we got home, my sister locked her phone in a drawer like it was poison. "Change your privacy settings," she said. "I will. Delete your address from anything public. If your name is tied to directories, pull it." She was spiraling into practical action, which is her default way of surviving hard things. I let her. That night I got another message. This time the number was not hidden. It was a local number. I didn't answer. Voicemail came in. No words. Just breathing, steady, unhurried. The sound of someone letting you know she could hear the space you lived in. I saved it and sent it to the detective. He called me almost immediately. "We can get a warrant for the carrier data," he said. "Do you have a name?" "Not yet." I closed my eyes. The next day, the police asked me to come back to the facility as part of a controlled plan. They wanted to use me as visible bait. They didn't phrase it like that, but that was what it was. My sister argued with them in the parking lot. "This is reckless," she said. "We'll have officers on every exit," the detective replied. "We'll be watching the cameras. We'll have plainclothes staff inside. And if he kills someone else to distract you?" The detective held her gaze. "Then we'll stop him when he tries." I stood between them, feeling like a rope in a tug of war. I was furious at the police for needing me. I was furious at my sister for being right. I was furious at myself for agreeing. But I agreed, because I was so tired of being acted upon. If I was going to keep living in his story, I wanted at least one page where I turned the line. The plan was simple. I would return for a brief administrative appointment to collect employment paperwork. I'd walk the main hall. I'd be visible. I'd be predictable. Police would monitor the service corridor, the staff offices, the break room, and the loading area. They suspected he would attempt contact once he saw me back in the building. I wore street clothes, not scrubs. I hated that I was already thinking like prey. The lobby looked normal. The receptionist greeted me politely. The holiday wreath at the front desk smelled like plastic pine. I walked with an officer a few steps behind me, not making eye contact so he could appear like an ordinary visitor. The administrator's office was on the first floor near the dining hall. I knocked. He was on a conference call and waved me in with the distracted irritation of someone who sees me as a problem in a schedule. He handed me a folder of forms. "Sign here, here, and here," he said. I signed. He didn't look at me once. As I stood to leave, he finally said, "I'm sorry this has been difficult." We both knew he meant difficult for the brand. I left his office and started toward the staff hallway. The officer behind me slowed, giving me space. The staff corridor was quieter, less decorated, more honest. Halfway down, I saw a man in a white coat standing near the vending machines. He was not wearing the pig mask. His face was uncovered, and I recognized him instantly, not because I had met him, because I had seen him in passing dozens of times and never stored his image. He was one of those people who belong to the building the way a chair belongs to a room. Maintenance. His name tag read T. Henkel. He held a mop handle in one hand. In the other was a clipped stack of paper towels. He looked at me with a mild expression that suggested he was about to apologize for being in the way. Then he said my name, softly, like he was testing how it sounded without a mask. My spine went cold. I stopped walking. The officer behind me moved closer. "Can I help you?" I asked. My voice surprised me by staying steady. T. Henkel smiled. It was an ordinary smile. That was the horror of it. "I'm glad you came back," he said. The statement was intimate in a way that made my skin crawl. The officer stepped forward. "Sir, can I see your ID?" Henkel looked at him with mild interest. "Of course," he said. He reached into his coat. The officer tensed. So did I. Henkel pulled out an ID badge. He held it up. It looked real. Because it probably was. The officer took it. While the officer glanced down, Henkel moved. Fast. Not panicked, not sloppy. He swung the mop handle into the officer's wrist with a sharp crack that made me flinch. The officer's grip loosened. Henkel stepped into him, close enough to look like a struggle between co-workers. Then Henkel slipped past. I heard a radio crackle. Footsteps in the distance. Shouted instructions. I ran the opposite direction. Not because it was logical, but because adrenaline makes you choose motion over strategy. Behind me, the officer regained his balance and gave chase. Henkel turned a corner into the service access stairwell. A door slammed. I skidded to a stop at the intersection, breathing hard. The building erupted with noise. Security was moving. Staff were being instructed to lock doors. Police officers in plain clothes appeared from hallways like they'd been standing there all along. The detective's voice came through the radio of someone near me. "He's headed to the back stairwell. Contain him." Contain. A word that belongs to animals and spills. I stood pressed against a wall while the operation swarmed past me. My hands shook so hard I had to tuck them under my arms. 20 minutes later, the detective found me. "He got into the loading area," he said. "Did you catch him?" The look on his face answered before he spoke. "He slipped through an exterior gate. We lost him in the alley access behind the imaging center." I laughed. It wasn't funny. It was the sound of a person who has reached the edge of her patience. "You had the whole building," I said. "You had me as your bait." And he still walked out. We didn't anticipate he'd come without the mask. Why would he need it? He didn't respond. I went home with my sister again, numb and furious and sick. That evening, the facility was evacuated once more. Regulators were notified. The plaza's property management began emergency reviews of shared access spaces. The administrator finally stopped hiding behind PR language. He used the word attack. He still didn't say our negligence. The next morning, the detective came to my sister's apartment. He brought a thin file. "We think your guess was right," he said. "What guess?" "That he was using maintenance access. We have a probable identity." He opened the file. A photo. Same man I had seen by the vending machines. Except the photo was older. Cleaner haircut. A neutral DMV stare. Tobias Henkel. Employment history across multiple contracted services. Custodial. Facilities. Short stints in healthcare support roles. He had moved between companies like someone who understood how little oversight exists in the lower levels of institutional work. He has no clinical license, the detective said, but he completed a basic phlebotomy course 10 years ago. We're looking into where. That detail hit me like a slap. He didn't need an MD. He treasured the gestures of medicine, needles, gloves, the illusion of expertise. "Does he have a record?" my sister asked. "Minor charges, trespass, a harassment complaint that was withdrawn. Nothing that would flag him as violent." "Where is he now?" I asked. "We're working on it." He said it like a protective lie. "We have a warrant," he added. "We're checking his last known address and interviewing coworkers." I thought of the dressing room in the supply space, the rack of coats, the badges, the social media photos. He had been building this for a long time. The killer wasn't impulsive. He was patient. 2 hours after the detective left, my phone buzzed. A new message, from a number labeled by the carrier as unknown. "Your world is small. Mine is a uniform." I showed my sister. She said one word: "Police." We called. The detective's voice sounded strained. "We're tightening protective measures around you," he said. I didn't ask what that meant, because I had learned that the gap between promise and reality was huge. That night, I slept on my sister's couch. She slept with her bedroom door open, like the sound of my breathing was a tether she needed. At some point in the early hours, we both woke to a sound that was not dramatic, not a cinematic crash, just the soft click of the building's front door. My sister sat up. I sat up. We listened. Footsteps on the hardwood. Slow. Measured. She reached for her phone. I reached for mine. A shadow crossed the edge of the hallway. Then a man stepped into view. No mask. No white coat. Just ordinary clothes. A dark jacket. Work boots. A face that could pass on a train without your eyes catching. He looked at us as if we were a meeting he was on time for. I felt my body lock. He smiled. "You should change your locks," he said. His voice was soft and low. Not theatrical, not crazed, just calm. My sister hit the emergency call button on her phone. He didn't rush. He moved closer. I breathed in sharply and stood. The couch was between us. The distance was not enough. My sister grabbed a heavy ceramic lamp from the side table. She swung it. The lamp struck his shoulder. He grunted, more annoyed than hurt. I moved in at the same time because sometimes instincts line up with bravery. I shoved him. He stumbled. Then he recovered and grabbed me by the wrist. His grip was strong and surprisingly warm. The human detail made my stomach turn. He pulled me toward him. "I don't want to hurt her," he said to my sister. Then to me, "I want you to understand what you are." I tried to wrench free. He tightened his grip. From his pocket, he produced a small syringe. The same calm ritual. The same unholy professionalism. My sister screamed. Loud. Raw. The sound of someone who has decided fear can't solve this. She grabbed the lamp again and hit his arm. The syringe flew from his hand and skittered across the floor. I slammed my knee into his thigh. He released me with a sharp sound of pain. I scrambled backward. He turned toward the doorway as if he'd simply completed a test. Sirens were already rising in the distance. He looked at me again. "No more masks," he said. You earned my face." Then he walked out the front door. Walked, not ran. As if the apartment building belonged to him too. Police arrived minutes later. They searched the stairwell, the street, the adjacent alleys. He was gone. We gave statements with shaking hands. An officer photographed the syringe on the floor. They took it for analysis. My sister's landlord changed the building locks that afternoon. The police placed patrols outside for 2 nights. I don't know if it was enough to matter. His visit wasn't about killing me. It was about claiming territory. He had stepped across the boundary I still believed existed between my work life and my real life. He had proven he could enter my sister's home with the same ease he entered a facility full of locked doors. 2 days after that break-in, they found his apartment. The detective called to tell me before I saw it on the news. "He's not there," he said. "What did you find?" "A workshop, storage, evidence of planning." "Bodies?" "Not at the location. But there were photos, uniforms, badges, a handwritten list of names. The list was longer than I expected. Staff across the plaza, patients from the urgent care, residents from our facility, random strangers photographed in hallways. He had been selecting roles like a casting director. The detective asked if I was willing to provide a public statement to accompany the updated manhunt. I said no. I was done being his advertisement. The next week moved with the slow dread of a storm that hasn't decided where to strike. The facility remained closed. Families relocated their loved ones to other sites. The administrator resigned under pressure. Regulators announced an investigation into security lapses and shared access conditions across the medical plaza. The story was everywhere. But he wasn't. I kept waiting for another message. Instead, there was silence. That kind of silence can make you almost forget to be afraid. Almost. On the 9th day after the break-in, the detective called and asked me to come to the station again. They had picked up a man matching Henkel's description in a neighboring town. He had been stopped near a small private clinic after hours. He carried a duffel bag with medical supplies and a blank set of laminated badges. They wanted me to sit behind one-way glass and confirm identity. I went with my sister. We sat in a dark observation room with cheap chairs and the smell of stale air. Henkel was on the other side, hands cuffed, posture relaxed. His face was swollen slightly at the shoulder where my sister's lamp had hit him. He looked tired. Everyone looks human when they're sitting under fluorescent lights. The detective asked quietly, "Is that him?" I stared at Henkel. He lifted his eyes. For a heartbeat, I had the clear, awful sense that he knew exactly where I was sitting, that the glass was just another prop. "Yes," I said. The detective exhaled. "We're charging him on multiple counts. We're still building the full case." I nodded. I thought relief would feel like falling onto a mattress. Instead, it felt like stepping onto an ice-covered sidewalk and realizing you still had to cross the street. Because an arrest is not a story's end. It's the start of paperwork and hearings, and the long, humiliating process of proving what your body already knows. The detectives asked if I'd be willing to do a formal recorded interview. I did it. I described the pig mask, the corridor, the alcove, The messages. Evan's death. The dressing room. The break-in at my sister's place. I watched as the interviewer's pen paused at certain details. The mask, the stethoscope, the syringe. To him, these were evidence. To me, they were a language. Henkel's language was about authority and intimacy and violation. The pig mask was almost a joke in that language. A crude way of saying we were livestock in his care. When the interview ended, I asked the detective one question. Why a pig? He looked cautious. We can't speculate too much, but some offenders use animal imagery to dehumanize victims. I nodded. Or to mock the system, I said. He didn't confirm, but I felt it. The mask was a sneer, not at the residents, at us, at the idea that care protects people, at the belief that uniforms mean ethics. That week, the prosecutor offered a plea negotiation. Henkel declined, which meant we were heading toward trial. I considered what that would take from me. Time off unpaid, testimony, 100 headlines that would reduce people like Evan and Mr. Dieter to a number in a series. The thought made me nauseous, but I agreed to testify if needed. I was done letting him control the final shape of this story. 2 months later, he attempted suicide in custody. They saved him. I heard about it through the detective, not the news. He sounded grim rather than surprised. He wants to choose his exit, my sister said when I told her. She was right. He wanted to keep control even over his own consequences. The trial date was set, then postponed, then set again. That cycle is a unique kind of torture. It keeps you in the hallway outside the worst room of your life. On the morning I was scheduled to give pre-trial testimony, I woke before my alarm and sat in silence for a long time. I took the subway to the courthouse alone. My sister wanted to come. I told her no, I needed to walk into that building on my own 2 feet. The courthouse was sterile and cold and full of people who looked like they'd practiced neutrality as a career. I waited in a small room with a legal advocate who offered me water and the kind of careful kindness that has been trained into her voice. A bailiff opened the door. "They're ready for you." I walked into the room and took a seat. Henkel was at the defense table. No mask, no coat. Just a man in a cheap suit with short hair and a face that looked almost bored. When I sat down, he looked at me. I expected the smile. Instead, he looked disappointed, like a child watching a toy stop working. The prosecutor asked me to recount the first night. I told the story with as little emotion as I could manage. If I cracked, I didn't want it on his terms. The defense attorney tried to cast doubt on my memory. Fatigue, stress, misinterpretation. You didn't actually see the person's face until the recent incident, correct? Correct. And you can't be sure the man you saw earlier is the same man you saw later. I'm sure. How? Because he wanted me to be sure, I said. The attorney frowned. I'm asking about evidence, not feelings. Then the evidence is the messages, the photos, the break-in, the staging area, the badge printer, the syringe recovered in my sister's apartment, I replied. The judge told me to answer only what was asked. I nodded. The legal system doesn't love the truth when the truth comes in a human shape. After the hearing, I walked into the hallway and leaned against a wall. The advocate handed me water again. "You did well," she said. I didn't want praise. I wanted the whole thing to end. It ended sooner than expected. 3 days later, Henkel accepted a plea deal. Multiple life sentences without parole. He admitted to 6 murders across the medical plaza and the assisted living facility. The number was both smaller and larger than I had feared. Smaller because my mind had been tallying bodies like a nightmare accountant. Larger because 6 human lives is not a number that should ever be said casually. The plea spared families the long spectacle of a full trial. It spared me the complete dissection of my fear. But it didn't give us a clean ending. Because in his statement, Henkel said something that settled into me like a splinter. He said he chose the facility because it was quiet, because the residents were already being prepared for dying, because staff were trained to accept deterioration, which meant he expected his violence to blend into the normal sadness of the place. He was wrong. We noticed. I noticed. That truth is the only thing I let myself take as a kind of victory. The facility never reopened. A new company bought the property and converted it into outpatient offices. The memory care wing was gutted and rebuilt with shiny glass walls and a fitness studio. Walking past it now feels like looking at a tooth that's been capped. Smooth, expensive, hiding a history of pain. I found a different job in a small rehabilitation center outside the city. Day shifts, stricter access controls, a manager who actually listens when staff raise safety concerns. I still flinch when someone in a white coat comes around a corner unexpectedly. I still notice badges instinctively. I still hate the smell of bleach in narrow hallways. Sometimes I dream about the pig mask anyway. Not because it was the scariest part, because it was the easiest part to name. People ask me now. In the gentle, clumsy way people ask survivors questions, what the worst moment was. They expect me to say the bodies, Evan, or the break-in, or the messages. But the worst moment was something quieter. It was the first time I called out to him in the corridor, when I believed a uniform meant I could demand order, when I believed the building's rules were real enough to protect me. I introduced myself to the wrong person, and it took me months to understand that the mask wasn't a supernatural horror. It was a mirror. It showed us how fragile our systems are, how easily care can be imitated, how a place built for safety can be turned into a set for someone else's private ritual. I don't think about him every day now, but I think about the residents. Mr. Dieter with his stubborn pride, Mrs. Rabe with cookies in her drawer, Elias expecting to be discharged, Evan who came to work for a weekend and never got to complain about the paperwork again. They deserved a world where trust didn't get used against them. I can't give them that world, but I can say their names out loud. I can refuse to let their deaths become a spooky story people tell over drinks. And I can tell anyone who will listen the blunt truth I learned the hard way. If you build a system where anyone in the right outfit can walk through the door, you are not building safety. You are building a shortcut for the worst kind of person. The last message I ever received came a month after the plea. It was not from an unknown number. It was a letter forwarded through legal channels. The advocate asked if I wanted to read it. I said yes. The paper was ordinary, the handwriting neat. He wrote that he had admired my attention. He wrote that I was part of the experiment. He wrote that my fear had been useful. He wrote that I should be grateful he had chosen a place that already understood death. I read the letter once. Then I asked the advocate to destroy it, because that was the last control he was going to try to take from me. I walked out of that office into a cold afternoon and felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness, not peace. Just the quiet acceptance that survival is not a single moment. It's a habit you build after someone tries to rewrite you. I still work in care. That fact surprises some people. It surprises me sometimes too. But I didn't want him to steal that part of my life. I didn't want the pig mask to become the symbol of my entire relationship with health and vulnerability. So I stayed in the field. I got training in safety protocols. I became the annoying staff member who insists on double verification. The one who checks doors and logs and asks, "Who are you here to see?" even when someone sighs at me. If that makes me paranoid, fine. I'd rather be the difficult person than the quiet person who learns too late that danger looks professional when it needs to. Sometimes on late afternoons when the corridors of my new workplace are quiet and the windows reflect the soft gray of winter, I catch my own outline in the glass. A woman in scrubs, a badge clipped to her chest. A person who has learned what those symbols can hide. I pause. I breathe. Then I keep doing my job. Because that is the most honest ending I can offer. Not a clean victory. Not a perfectly sealed nightmare. Just a life put back together with careful hands.